welcome into another edition here of the GSMC the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for joining me on this Monday afternoon. We should have a great show ahead. Starting off by staying in the realm of Wildcard Weekend. Going to be recapping a couple of games throughout the week. Starting off with that Sunday night thriller between the Commanders and the Bucs. What a game it was. And then previewing our final remaining wildcard game over there in the NFC between the Vikings and the Rams, previewing another game taking place out west, Spurs, Lakers. We're going to be reacting kind of belatedly to this Antonio Pierce firing in Las Vegas. Very interesting situation there that has a lot of interesting storylines to follow. And last but not least, if you're a European football fan, stick around, especially if you're a Bayern Munich fan like myself, as I discuss their master plan to try and sign German wonderkid Florian Wirtz in the summer of 2026 after the events of the World Cup. Before we get into any of that good stuff, I do want to remind you, as always, to like, follow, and subscribe to the podcast and the network itself if you haven't done so already, to keep up to date with not just my show, but other great shows taking place around this time on the network as well. But if you want to contribute and interact with the shows a little bit more directly, consider making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube, or go to our website, gsmcpodcast.net, and you can do the same thing. Either leave any questions, comments, or concerns you might have about the show, any opinions you might have about the show on that website right there on my ticker below, or do it through YouTube itself while we are live streaming. It is just a great way to contribute and interact with the show. Like I said, it's genuinely appreciated by all concerned here at the network. It just makes our shows that much better. Without further ado, let's jump right into talking Wild Card Weekend, specifically recapping that crazy game that took place last night in Tampa between the Washington Commanders and the Buccaneers. And this was probably, in my opinion, the best game of Wildcard Weekend, not just on the field and how it transpired, but on paper as well. I truly believe that people were underestimating this matchup just because both of these teams feel like the most raw teams in the field. And in reality, not many people would have thought to be following them, considering the fact that had either of them advanced, they would have faced the two NFC favorites to win the Super Bowl in both the Lions and the Eagles. So ultimately, not a lot of people were watching this game to have any hope or optimism about the prospects of their team's Super Bowl chances. This game was mainly about the future of both of these teams. And both of these teams were so similar that it did take kind of pivotal moments throughout the game to really decide it, and ultimately the Commanders came out on top 23-20 on a last-second doinked field goal by Zane Gonzalez. And it just goes to show that sometimes having a rookie QB works. Jaden Daniels became one of 4 QBs to go on the road in their rookie season and win a playoff game, joining Joe Flacco, Mark Sanchez, and Russell Wilson, and he played brilliantly. They played spectacularly in that game. And what I loved about Jaden Daniels was not just his play, but the way that offensive staff and Cliff Kingsbury believed in him in certain situations. I think the big difference in this game between the Commanders and the Bucs, but the Commanders went for it on 4th down and, most importantly, won that matchup. They were 3 for 5 on 4th down, including that pivotal touchdown catch from Terry McLaurin that put them up 20-17, forced the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to drive on the field to either tie or take the lead. And then in that same situation that the Bucs had on the Washington 14-yard line of 4th and 3, they didn't go for it and decided to kick the field goal, and ultimately look where that got them. But then again, there was one huge turnover that gave Washington the chance to go up by 3 points late in that game. That botched handoff or whatever it was between Baker Mayfield and Jalen McMillan that really cost the Bucs that game, in my opinion. But ultimately, there were very fine margins rather than throughout the rest of Wildcard Weekend, these big discrepancies between certain teams, say like the Broncos and Bills, or even the Ravens and Steelers. This was a closely contested match between two of the NFC's more intriguing teams, and I was really glad that we got at least one game from Wildcard Weekend that really topped them all. But then let's talk about these performances, because I feel as if we can't parse through many differences in either of these quarterbacks' performances because, for the most part, both of them played spectacularly, especially Jaden Daniels in certain situations. And I think that's the only way you can truly separate these two, is that Jaden Daniels, in critical moments, whether it be on fourth down or late in drives, really made the big plays, and his staff really trusted him. And not to say that Baker Mayfield did not make big plays. There were some big plays, like that 3rd and 9 run he had to sustain that drive. And then ultimately, it came down to the play he didn't make in terms of that botched handoff. But both of them, in terms of stats, let's talk about them. Jaden Daniels, 24 for 35, 268 yards, 2 touchdowns. Baker Mayfield, 15 for 18, 185 yards and 2 touchdowns. And I do think that ultimately it came down as well to supporting cast. Because in terms of supporting cast, Baker Mayfield's supporting cast didn't necessarily step up. Mike Evans certainly did in that situation against his longtime rival, Marshawn Lattimore, for the time when they were playing each other 2 times a year, when Marshawn Lattimore was still in the Saints. Legendary match. At this time, Mike Evans did get the better of him. I do believe, though, that Marshawn Lattimore wasn't at full health, but Mike Evans did have 7 receptions, 92 yards, 1 touchdown, making big plays in crucial moments. But it's the supporting cast of Washington that really stepped up. The unsung heroes like Olamide Zaccheaus, once an undrafted free agent, a 5'8 receiver that really was a cast-off in many situations. De'Ami Brown, the 3rd-year guy out of North Carolina, proven to be a deep play threat, but also really impressed me in terms of his underneath route running and his ability to get open in critical situations. 5 receptions, 89 yards, 1 touchdown, was the leading receiver. And then, of course, Terry McLaurin working his magic in certain situations as well. Really coming up big time and time again with a lot of spectacular grabs in this one for Washington. Ultimately, like I said, in a game of this magnitude where both of these teams are so finely matched up, it's very hard to say, well, one team lost this game and one team won this game. But you have to look at the plays and the players who stepped up. That's what I think it really came down to, my opinion, because looking at time of possession, which is another huge indicator of how game flow really pans out, Commanders did have a shockingly commanding, for lack of a better term, line of possession with 35 minutes and 26 seconds, but it's not necessarily a huge discrepancy. I mean, it does show that they had a modicum of control over this game, but ultimately, when you're playing a team like the Bucs, can score at any moment. I really do think that doesn't matter as much as the players around Jaden Daniels and the staff really trusting him with such a heavy workload that depended on his brilliant play and his efficient play at that to carry them over the finish line on the road. So ultimately, I do think that when we look at Wildcard weekend games from this season, this one will stand the test of time. But let it stand the test of time because of the competition and the competitive nature of this game rather than the mistake. And it was only one mistake. Had it been a myriad number of mistakes for the Bucs, it would have been a little bit more glaring. It would have been a little bit more obvious. But ultimately, I do think that in terms of competitive spirit, passion, this game topped them all. And I hope that the next game we're going to be talking about in the next segment of Vikings-Rams can conclude Wildcard Weekend with a bang as well. But ultimately, I just appreciate this game as a whole. But going forward for both teams, for the Bucs into the offseason, for the Commanders to take on the 1-seed Lions in Detroit, I feel like the Commanders, yes, are going to be massive underdogs, but another aspect of this game that I was really impressed by was their defense, especially their run defense as a whole. Guys like Daron Payne, Jonathan Allen stepping up in the crease, Bobby Wagner really reading this defense very well in terms of that linebacker tandem between him and Luvu. So ultimately, really impressed. Yes, the secondary has a lot of work still left to do. Ultimately, they might want Marshawn Lattimore to recuperate a little bit more. But I do believe that Commanders might shock people a little bit in this one. I do think that the Lions are a team that is depleted defensively, obviously, still can outscore anybody in this bracket. But I do think that what I really love about the Commanders headed into this game is that they're going in with no fear. They've seen what Jaden Daniels can do now in a playoff setting on the road, no less, and they're going to call this game like they would any other game for Jaden Daniels in terms of whether or not, he's a rookie or not. Because that seems to put everyone off a little bit, but Jaden Daniels has proven time in, time out that he can handle the pressure of the playoff environment. And so that's why going into this one, I'm still heavily favoring Detroit just because of their own potent offense. But don't think that Cliff Kingsbury, Dan Quinn, and co. are not going to call an aggressive game plan for Jaden Daniels. And then on the Bucs side of things, I actually think the Bucs have a very bright future. It's their second straight playoff appearance with Baker at the helm, and I do think, yes, they're going to have to start looking at options after both Godwin and Evans depart. They're getting up there. This was Mike Evans' 11th straight season, 1,000 yards, but how many more seasons are you going to get out of him and Godwin both? But I do like the pieces they have. Bucky Irving proved a spark plug in terms of the running game. I like what Kate Otten is doing there as well. Jalen McMillan really came on in Chris Godwin's absence, and I like how this offense is set up. Obviously, Liam Cohen's going to get a lot of calls for head coaching opportunities, so maybe retaining him will be the biggest thing I'm looking for. But ultimately, I'm excited about this Bucs team. But I have to say, the Ty Bowles also kind of let this team down because his clock management late in this one left a lot to be desired, and I do think that that was another big part of why the Bucs didn't win this game in the crucial moments. And so that has to be looked into a little bit, fixed and adjusted in the offseason. But ultimately, what a game. Glad that it wasn't a dud like the rest. And really hypes me up for this matchup between David and Goliath and the Commanders and the Lions. But coming next, we talk about the final game of Wildcard weekend, Vikings-Rams, and the ramifications, so to speak, of this matchup, and also what it means for the city of LA as well. But let's go into the break, and when we come back, we'll talk about it all on the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing.